Last week, Grace read a passage from Hebrews chapter 12, which includes the sentence, "See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble." It's so easy to be bitter. Bitterness arises in your soul when something grieves you and you have no chance to set it straight. I am sure you are familiar with the flavour. And my heart was filled with bitterness last Sunday as I watched David Attenborough's programme on the extinction crisis. For as far back as I can remember, I have loved the earth and have grieved over its destruction, most of which has taken place during my lifetime. How can we not be bitter to see thoughtless clearing of precious rainforest just to plant soya beans for cattle feed? How can we not react with bitterness when we learn, as the United Nations warned this week, that 1 million species are threatened with extinction? It's tempting to look for somebody to blame, and bitterness does engulf me when I think of national and world leaders who do so little to care for the earth and who are so cavalier in their disregard for those who are hurt by their policies. Bitterness arises when you look for acknowledgement and find none, when you have made a contribution and it is disregarded, when your viewpoint is ignored and the issues you want to raise are dismissed as of no account. The problem with bitterness is that it turns back on itself. Those who cause the bitterness sail blithely on, quite unaware, while your spirit curdles within you. Because bitterness eats you from within. It can render you angry and destructive, or it can depress you. It can also make you ineffective, the victim of your own passions. Bitterness can destroy a fellowship, or a family, or a marriage. It can colour all your decisions and taint your responses to other people. Bitterness leads to scapegoating, to thinking, if only I could get rid of Donald Trump or Boris Johnson, things would start to get better. And bitterness can also be a temptation, a refuge, a place of bleak comfort where we are absolved of responsibility because the situation is out of our hands. Bitterness provokes us to focus on the personal and to miss the wider picture. If bitterness is not addressed, it leads to despair. And one of the qualities that I most admire about David Attenborough is that he has not given in to despair, although he is better placed than most of us to see the scale of the devastation which our species has committed during the last 50 years. So, if bitterness fills your soul, what should you do? How, for example, should you pray? Specifically, how is it possible to pray for those who are the source of your bitterness? Such prayer can feel like ashes in the mouth. How do I pray for the trawlermen who drag nets across the ocean floor, destroying what they do not catch? How do I pray for the politicians who turn aside refugees and prevent shelter and food from reaching them? How do I pray, even, for the man who saw fit to empty his trash out of his car into the gutter immediately outside my house? Even to pray can be too much to ask. So, we need to start further back. I suggest that we start not with the crimes or the misconduct of those who have provoked our bitterness, but rather with our common status as creatures of the Most High. One of the points that is now being raised regularly by Extinction Rebellion and by many others within the ecological community is that we are all in this together. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, so wrote the poet John Donne. Therefore, he went on, never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. John Donne was right, of course, but he didn't go far enough. We and the planet are one. The wildfires of California and of Oregon affect us. As Grace pointed out the other day, dust from the Sahara provides nutrients for the Amazon. Or as the author Deepak Chopra put it, the trees are our lungs, the rivers our circulation, the air our breath, and the earth our body. Well, how does the Almighty view us, part of one creation as we are? Working on the general principle that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, as Paul says in Romans, I am constrained to the unpalatable conclusion that I need the forgiveness of the Lord just as acutely as any illegal logger. More acutely, perhaps, because I am condemning his actions, whereas the logger may simply be seeking to feed his family. Well, thankfully, God's grace extends even to me. As it says in Lamentations chapter 3, the Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. God's grace is also the theme of the 23rd Psalm. This is easy to overlook because the psalm is so very familiar, but I find it a solace to my spirit to read lines such as, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The writer Murray Watts, who is a distinguished screenwriter and dramatist, and who co-founded the Riding Lights Theatre Company, Murray has made a practice over years of meditating each day on the 23rd Psalm, and he has this to say about it. If your heart is open to love, then this song is for you. It is not about romantic love, but it will bring far deeper love into all your relationships. If you have no interest in religion, but consider yourself spiritual, then this song is for you. If your life is in deep trouble, then this song is for you. More than any song or poem, it has been read in desperate times and brought comfort to the broken-hearted and to the dying. If your life is successful, happy and fulfilled, then this song is for you. For why wouldn't you want to go deeper and further into a peace and happiness that is beyond your wildest dreams? Well, if I start at this point, that is to say, in rejoicing in the Lord who is my shepherd, then I will have begun the day well. I am on the road away from bitterness. Perhaps there is room, after all, in my soul to start praying. But how? At this point, I need an illustration. And this morning I am pleased to inform you that we have a couple of celebrity guests. However, they are a little camera shy, so they won't appear on screen. Let me first invite President Trump to join us. So, step forward, Mr. Trump, and take a seat. Tell me, have you ever read the 23rd Psalm? Ah. Well, give it a try. Now, tell me how I can pray for you. Help me to see past the manna to the man. I know, for instance, that you long to be liked. I long for that too. You are vulnerable to the hungers and passions of the body. So am I. You seem insecure. I know about insecurity. Well, when I think about what you are dealing with, Mr. Trump, I owe you an apology, because it is unfair of me to expect more from you than I expect from myself. Well, once you go through an exercise of this kind, Donald Trump seems more of a man and less than a monster. You might not want to have a drink with him, but it becomes possible to pray for him, and your sense of bitterness and outrage start to recede. However, what should we pray? Because to pray properly requires understanding. Let me recruit, in turn, Boris Johnson to help our reflections this morning. Greetings, Mr. Johnson. Do sit down. Take the weight off your feet. As the father of a young child, I imagine you're not getting as much sleep as you might. Tell me something about yourself which will help me to understand you. Talk to me about your journalism and your interest in classics and your admiration for Winston Churchill. Tell me about your turbulent upbringing and the smart set at Eton and Oxford among whom you moved. Perhaps you would like to share something about your enthusiasm for headlines. Yes, it was a good joke you told in the House of Commons last week. Yes. In return, let me admit to you that I too find it tempting to make people laugh, or to try to do so. I am tempted to reach for the quick effect. I am tempted to skimp on my research, and indeed to let my eyes linger on pretty girls. Once again, I have to say to you that when I get to know you, Mr. Johnson, I cannot be disappointed in you without also being disappointed in myself. As I understand myself, I am the more able to understand you. Both Mr. Trump and Mr. Johnson are prone to bluster, especially when their shortcomings are exposed. They have a tendency to employ volume to win their point. This is true of many men. My family know perfectly well that I will override others, if permitted, in order to carry the argument. Once we have gone through such an exercise and acknowledged that none of us is an emperor, but that all of us are wearing transparent suits, then the Trump monster and the Johnson monster are reduced to scale. They appear as bumbling humans, just like the rest of us, vulnerable and defensive, overbearing and cunning, easily manipulated by special interests. It is apparent that their abiding weakness is that they are desperate for respect, but are members of a profession in which respect is often short. The point of this exercise is to demonstrate that bitterness often arises when we look around for somebody to blame. And the solution, of course, is to refuse to play the blame game, to work intelligently to make things better, and to pray. There is a further step to take, as you travel away from bitterness, and that is to love, which requires you to extend both candour and compassion to yourself. As Jesus said it, you cannot love your neighbour without loving yourself. As anyone who has maintained a close relationship for any length of time will know, you cannot love a cardboard cutout, nor indeed can a cardboard cutout offer love. If you try to prop up a false self in order to win love and respect, it will demand all your strength, and it won't work, because people are not stupid and will quickly discern if the image you present is fundamentally dishonest. And of course, it is especially hard to love politicians, because they frequently trade in falsity. To love or to receive love, you have to be honest. To love requires us to perceive what is real and to see past the sin to the sinner. This is not easy. To love the industrialist, but not his pollution, the logger, but not his destructive conduct. This may require more bandwidth than we can manage. This kind of discernment is costly in terms of time and effort. Which is where God comes in, because the task it's beyond us. All we can do is to keep in mind that we wish ourselves to be understood and loved and prayed for, and then to extend the same courtesy to the Trumps and the Johnsons and the Putins and the Bolsonaros and the Xi Jinpings of the world. As we understand and love and pray, the bitterness starts to recede. And just to bear in mind, the news is often more complicated than it first appears. Trump is certainly no environmentalist, and his dreadful rollbacks of environmental legislation will have long-term impact. But just 4 weeks ago, he did sign into law the Great American Outdoors Act, which is a huge program of investment and one of the most significant pieces of conservation legislation enacted in the States in half a century. Part of me wants to perceive him as the climate-gobbling oligarch presented by the media, but it isn't entirely true. We can't afford the luxury of believing in superheroes or supervillains, and Trump is just a man. In the name of Christ, Amen.